Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something pretty central to getting new healthcare products out there, the outsourcing of regulatory affairs.
That's right.
We've got this recent market report, gives us a real snapshot for 2025, and the main number is big. We're talking a $6.9 billion market globally.
Yeah, pretty massive.
Yeah.
And it's not static either. Lots of projected growth.
So our goal today really is to unpack that, what's driving it, who's involved, and why it's such a dynamic area right now.
Exactly. And it boils down to this. Getting a new drug or device approved is, well, it's complicated. You've got rules, regulations varying by country.
Right.
And with clinical trials ramping up globally, which they are, that just adds layers of regulatory work.
More research, more rules to follow.
Precisely. And that's where bringing in outside experts, the outsourcing part, really comes into play. It becomes essential for a lot of companies.
Okay, so $6.9 billion in 2025. That's our starting point. Where does the report see this heading? What's the trajectory?
Yeah. The projections are quite strong. By 2033, they're expecting it to nearly double.
Double, wow.
Yeah, hitting close to $13.6 billion. That works out to a compound annual growth rate, or CAGR, of about 8.8% per year from 2025 through 2033.
8.8%. That's solid, sustained growth.
It really signals that this isn't just a blip, it's a fundamental shift in how regulatory work gets done in the industry.
Okay, that kind of growth.
What?
It makes you ask, where is this happening? Geographically speaking, let's start with North America. What's the story there?
Well, North America is currently the heavyweight champion, you could say.
Okay.
In 2025, it accounts for over 40% of the global market. That translates to about $2.56 billion.
So the biggest slice of the pie right now.
Definitely. Though, interestingly, its projected growth rate, around 7.3% through 2033, is actually a bit more moderate compared to some other regions we'll talk about.
And within North America, I'm guessing the U.S. dominates.
Oh, absolutely. No surprise there. The U.S. market alone is estimated at just over $2 billion for 2025.
$2 billion just in the U.S.
Yeah, and it's forecast to grow at about 7.1% annually. The report specifically mentions the growing adoption of advanced healthcare tech in the U.S.
Like new devices, digital health, that sort of thing.
Exactly. All that innovation needs regulatory guidance to actually reach patients, and that's fueling the demand for outsourcing.
Makes sense. What about the neighbors, Canada and Mexico?
Canada's market is smaller, naturally, around $307 million in 2025. But its growth projection is actually a bit higher than the U.S. at 8.1%.
Oh, interesting. Why is that?
Well, the report suggests Canada's own strict regulatory environment is a factor.
Ah, so the complexity there drives outsourcing.
Seems so.
Yeah.
Especially things like labeling, post-market surveillance. It can be more efficient for companies, particularly smaller ones maybe, to just outsource that expertise for the Canadian market.
Got it. And Mexico?
Mexico's around $233 million with a pretty solid growth forecast too, about 7.8%. So North America overall, clearly a major hub.
Right. The current leader. Okay, let's cross the Atlantic. Europe. How does it stack up?
Europe's another really significant player. Holds over 30% of the global revenue.
Okay, so also a huge piece.
Definitely. The market size there in 2025 is just over $2 billion. Very close to the U.S. figure, actually. And projected growth is strong too, 7.8% annually.
So similar scale to the U.S. market, slightly faster growth projection for the region overall.
That's right. It's a massive, very active landscape for regulatory affairs.
Any particular countries in Europe driving that?
Yeah, a few stand out. The UK, for instance, about $337 million market size, but with an 8.6% growth forecast, quite strong.
And the reason?
Yeah.
Similar to Canada, strong systems, regulations.
Pretty much. Established healthcare systems plus their own robust regulatory framework, the MHRA and all that. Germany is actually the largest market in Europe, around $397 million.
Good.
And their growth is pegged at 8.0%. The report mentions a rising number of companies trying to enter the German market specifically.
Needing help navigating the BFRM requirements and so on.
Exactly. Then you've got France, Italy, also significant contributors, so maybe slightly more moderate growth, around 7%.
And then there are others listed too, right? Smaller but still active markets.
Yeah, the report lists quite a few. Russia has a surprisingly large figure, over $300 million, though slightly slower growth. Spain, Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, Luxembourg. Even the rest of Europe category is substantial. It shows how widespread this need is across the continent.
It really paints a picture of a complex, continent-wide regulatory environment. Okay, now, let's shift to the region everyone often points to for rapid growth, Asia-Pacific.
APAC.
Ah, yes, APAC. This is where the growth numbers really jump out.
I bet.
So the market size in 2025 is estimated at around $1.66 billion. That's about 23% of the global total, so smaller than North America or Europe currently.
But the growth.
That's the kicker. The projected CAGR is 11.6%.
Wow, 11.6%. That's significantly higher.
It really is. It suggests APAC is going to become a much, much bigger force in this market over the next decade.
So where's that growth concentrated? Is it all China? China is definitely a huge part of it. Its market is nearing $700 million, growing at 11.1%. And the report links that partly to the availability of skilled regulatory professionals there.
Okay, skilled workforce helps.
But interestingly, India, while starting smaller, about $166 million, has the highest growth rate in the region.
Higher than China.
Yep, 13.5%.
13.5. What's fueling that?
It seems to be the rapid expansion of India's own pharmaceutical and biotech sectors, lots of domestic growth, and companies looking outwards, needing regulatory support.
That's fascinating. What about other key APAC countries?
Japan and South Korea are also major players, both with substantial markets, over $200 million for Japan, nearly $200 million for South Korea, and both showing strong double-digit growth projections, around 10–11%.
Strong growth across the board in major economies there.
Pretty much. And don't overlook Southeast Asia as a collective region either. That group is projected to grow at 12.4%. Australia, Singapore, Taiwan also showing very healthy growth above 10%. It's really dynamic across APAC.
Okay, APAC is clearly the one to watch for growth. Let's quickly cover the other regions. South America.
South America represents just over 5% of the global market. About $263 million in 2025, with a projected growth rate of 7.4%, so similar to North America's overall rate.
Any standouts there?
Brazil is the largest market, around $112 million, and it shows stronger growth at 10.1%, apparently driven by rising demand for innovative therapies. Argentina also shows growth over 10%, linked to improving healthcare infrastructure. Colombia, Peru, Chile also contributing.
Got it. How about the Middle East?
The Middle East is currently a smaller piece, around 2% globally, market size roughly $277 million in 2025.
Okay.
But like APAC, it shows strong growth potential, 10.1% CAGR overall for the region.
1% growth again. Where's that coming from?
Saudi Arabia and the UAE are the biggest markets, both projected above 10% growth. Turkey also stands out, nearly 11% growth, linked, like India, to its expanding biotech and pharma sectors, and Qatar's growth is tied to big investments in research and healthcare.
Interesting parallels there with India and Turkey. Finally, Africa.
Africa currently holds the smallest share, about 1% globally. It's around $152 million in 2025. But again, decent growth projected at 9.1%.
9% isn't insignificant, even off a small base.
Exactly. South Africa is the main market there. Nigeria's growth is linked to efforts around healthcare access. So while it's the smallest region now, that growth rate suggests, future potential as healthcare systems continue to develop.
That global tour is really insightful. You see the different scales, but also common themes like complexity and growth driving outsourcing needs everywhere.
Absolutely.
Now, the report also slices the market differently, right? By the type of service being outsourced. What are the big categories there?
Yeah, it does. The biggest segment, both currently in 2025 and expected to stay dominant, is clinical trial applications and product registrations.
Okay, that makes sense. The core submissions.
It's the gateway, essentially. Before you test a drug or sell a device, you need that regulatory green light. Outsourcing that whole complex application process is huge.
What else is key?
Another crucial area is regulatory writing and publishing.
So actually creating all the documents.
Exactly. Dossiers, submission packages, all the detailed stuff required by health authorities. These service providers are basically the critical communicators between the developers and the regulators.
Right. And which service area is growing the fastest? Is it one of those?
Actually, no. The report highlights regulatory consulting and legal representation services as having the fastest expected CAGR.
Consulting and legal rep. Why those specifically?
Well, think about that globalization trend we saw in the regional data. Companies expanding into new countries often need strategic advice. That's the consulting part.
Yeah.
And the legal representation piece is seen as a really big opportunity. If you're a U.S. company entering Europe or an Asian company entering the U.S., you often lack the deep, nuanced understanding of the local legal and regulatory landscape.
So you hire local legal expertise through these outsourcing firms.
Precisely. To navigate those specific national or regional requirements effectively and legally.
That ties back perfectly to the global picture. Okay, stepping back a bit. What does the report identify as the main forces, the drivers, pushing this whole market forward?
We touched on some already. The big one is definitely the rising volume of clinical trial activities globally.
More trials, more regulatory work.
Yep. Tied to that is the general surge in R&D spending across healthcare. More money going into research means more potential products needing approval, and just the overall growth in the pharmaceutical and biotech sectors themselves. Bigger industries, more activity.
Makes sense. Are there things holding it back? Any restraints mentioned?
Yes, a couple of key ones. Data privacy and security are major concerns.
Because you're sharing sensitive IP and patient data?
Exactly. Companies need to be really sure their outsourcing partners have ironclad security. That can be a barrier or at least a point of significant due diligence.
Understandable. Anything else?
Ironically, the sheer complexity of the regulations themselves can be a restraint.
How so? I thought complexity was a driver for outsourcing.
It is, but it's also a challenge within outsourcing. It means the outsourcing providers have to be incredibly specialized and constantly up to date. Finding the right partner with the exact expertise needed for, say, a complex biologic in multiple niche markets can be difficult. It raises the bar.
All right, a bit of a double-edged sword there.
Yeah.
Complexity creates the need, but also makes fulfilling the need harder. What about trends shaping the future here? Anything emerging?
Technology is the big one. The report points to a clear trend towards adopting advanced tech solutions.
Like what kind of tech?
Sophisticated software for managing regulatory information, submissions, tracking changes, also things like AI-powered tools for regulatory intelligence.
Using AI to track changing rules around the world.
Yeah, helping companies stay ahead of the curve. And automation for some of the more routine administrative regulatory tasks, trying to boost efficiency and accuracy.
So tech is becoming deeply integrated into this process.
Increasingly so, yes.
Okay, last piece. The players. Who's actually providing these services? What's the competitive landscape like?
It's described as highly competitive. You've got to mix some big global contract research organizations, CROs, that offer regulatory services, and also smaller, more specialized boutique firms, sometimes focused on specific regions or types of products.
Any names mentioned?
Yeah. The report lists a few examples to give a flavor, like Cambridge Regulatory Services, APC or Life Sciences, Real Regulatory Ltd, VCLS, quite a few others.
And is it a static market or are things changing?
Oh, definitely changing. The report notes activity like mergers and acquisitions. For example, AmerisourceBergen buying PharmaLex back in early 2023.
Okay, consolidation happening.
And collaborations, too, like VCLS partnering with EC Innovations, probably for language and translation support, which is crucial in global regulatory affairs. It shows the market is active, evolving.
Right. Okay, so wrapping this up, this deep dive shows the regulatory affairs outsourcing market in 2025 is, well, substantial, $6.9 billion.
And growing significantly. That 8.8% CAGR is really telling.
Driven by more R&D, more clinical trials, and just the sheer complexity of getting medical products approved worldwide.
Exactly. With some really interesting regional differences, especially that rapid growth in APAC, but also strong activity everywhere, and shifts in the types of services needed, like that growth in consulting and legal rep.
It really underscores how much the pharma and biotech industries rely on this external expertise now.
It does. It's become a critical part of the ecosystem.
So a final thought for you, our listener. As this market keeps growing and tech plays a bigger role, what other innovations might emerge? How else could managing global regulations evolve? Something to think about.
Definitely. It's a space that's likely to see a lot more change in the coming years.